Hi, for those who don't know me, my name is Joe Kipinti, and I am a geographer. I've been teaching geography for a few decades, and one of the classes that I teach is demographics and population studies, which includes things like infectious diseases and pandemics. And so I've tried to use my basic teaching knowledge and to present here some information that might be helpful to all of you. So here we go. Pandemic Update, April 15th by Joe Kipinti. As you can see by this map from St. Johns Hopkins University, some of the hotspots are Europe and the United States being the first among the world today with cases, which I'll show you in a moment. First, I want to start out with looking at the differences between Washington State and New York State. In the beginning of the pandemic, early on, they were running about the same. Now, the states are different. New York City is a global hub and a highly dense global city, and so it has more challenges than anywhere else. However, you can see the difference in how, over time, Washington has had a much better outcome. This is largely to do with this chart that most of us have seen by now many times over uh, about flattening the curve. The blue slope here represents what happens if you don't have any interventions. The virus is very contagious, so it spreads exponentially until most people have been infected, and then at that point, it begins to taper off. By doing social distancing measures, the peak is reduced, and this makes it much more possible for hospitals to handle the incoming patients. But the downside to that is that it will last longer and the deaths will plateau for a while at a relatively high level. But eventually, as you get down over time, the number of cases begin to decline. And here you can start to institute other means of fighting this disease, like, for example, contact tracing and extensive testing, which will allow people, in theory, to go back to work. And whenever the cases pop up again, then there are going to be systems to deal with them and tamp them back down. Let's start with the world first. Yeah, there's over 2 million cases now, 127,000 deaths, and almost half a million recovered. So you can see that the progression of the cases and death is still climbing. If you look at the numbers, the United States is leading the way with 613,000 cases and 26,000 deaths. Last night, we got the announcement that 2,400 people passed away in the United States, a far greater number than any other country. And part of that has to do with the fact that the United States has a much larger population. And part of that has to do with the fact that the United States got a much slower start than many other places. 26,000 deaths, 38,000 recovered out of 614,000 cases. In terms of what parts of the United States are being affected the most, again, it's New York. At the top with 778 deaths, 203,000 cases. In fact, this number is so high that if New York was a country on its own, it would be number two after the United States in the total number of cases in the entire world. New Jersey is really ramping up, so is Massachusetts and Michigan. Other states are following behind. We'll probably see these numbers begin to rise as the New York State numbers begins to plateau and perhaps start to decline in the next few days or weeks. Now, the case fatality rate, 6.5%, meaning that out of everyone who has been confirmed to have this disease, this many people have died, and if you divide the two together, you get 6.5%. This rate is extremely high, but a lot of it has to do with the fact that this number is too low. We don't know everyone who's infected. We also now know that this number is also low, that there are a lot of deaths happening that aren't being counted, and I'll show you a case of that in a minute. The United States is up to 4.9%, and the highest country here is 13%. And these numbers are reflecting the fact that not enough testing is being done. I would say that over time, we're going to find that the case fatality rate is not nearly as high as is being shown in a lot of these countries. At least let's hope so. Now, here's what's happened in New York City. They just changed their numbers because a lot of people were dying at home and not being recorded. So the city got on top of that, started to look and count up the number of people who were essentially being missed, and came up with about 3,700 people. And these numbers are going to be added to the data. It's a significant number of people. And this is the case in many, many other places in the world and across the country. There are just a lot of people dying, and not all of them are being counted. Now, what's going to happen in the future? This is a model that's showing it changes from day to day. Every time you run the model, you get different results. It looks back to see what's happened, what the numbers are, and then projects in the future. So you can tell there's kind of a range here going on as to what we could expect in the coming few months. And right now we're running about here. We're at the 2400 level. So we're running at the higher range of this model, except if you add the deaths from New York City, the 3,700, and will probably begin to rise to a higher level still. So it's not looking well. We really are in a very serious crisis. But I would say that if we hadn't done the social distancing measures, this would be paled by the numbers would be much, much, much higher than they are now. So there are repercussions to what's going on. I want to just point out a few articles that I've been reading recently. Here's Bill Gates talking about how cutting the WHO funding, which Trump announced yesterday, is really quite dangerous. And that's because a lot of poor countries, many, many countries in the world, rely on the WHO for help in this pandemic. They just don't have the resources that the wealthy countries do to do this on their own. And the WHO provides testing, it provides technology, provides know-how, and it coordinates the world's effort to fight this pandemic. The WHO has been fighting pandemics for decades, and it will continue to do so. And to cut the funding of this agency is, I can only say, highly irrational. It would be like cutting the police department because there are too many crimes. Guess what's going to happen to the crimes if you cut the police department? There are a lot of things to be critical about with the WHO, but the point is to fix the problems, not to eliminate the institution. The United States is also facing a political crisis of a different order, where a lot of governors are banding together to stand against the policies that Trump has been speaking of lately about restarting the economy. The governors are feeling that it's too early, and they want to have the ability to start their own state economies without the federal government forcing them to do it before they think it's time. And so they are allying together. There are two different coalitions, one in the West Coast, California, Oregon, and Washington, and then one of the northeastern states. There's about 7 states, including Massachusetts, that are banding together to come up with a coordinated effort to move forward with starting the economy in a much more scientific and rational way. And of course, the other repercussion is economic. Now look at this chart here, and this is over the last few decades, the jobless claims have been relatively steady. Now, if you were to focus in, you would see ups and downs. They don't come out very significant here because compared to what's happened lately with job losses, there's no comparison at all. What we're experiencing now is something that we've never experienced before. Not even in the Great Depression did you see job losses happening this quickly. We will need to start the economy again. The economy is essential to providing for basic needs of society. The question is, how do we do it? It's a huge challenge, but it can be done. What we need to do is to first tamp down the cases with social distancing, as we're doing now. Continue with social distancing until that curve goes down and we have much less cases. Once that happens, then new measures can be enacted. For example, states can begin to figure out who's infected, do extensive testing, and then focus in on the people who are sick. Uh, Social distancing focuses on everyone, on just keeping everyone apart. But what we want to be doing eventually is focusing on only who is sick and keeping them isolated or quarantined, and everyone else can go back to work. Slowly over time, we get there. And then if there are cases that come back up, that pop back up, the government can then figure out who they have had contact with, trace them down, and deal with those infections, keeping everyone, uh, society functioning essentially. We can only do this if we get the cases down first, because there are too many cases to do that right now. And hopefully, with a little bit of wisdom and a little bit of action, we can get to that point over the next few months. This is going to require patience. We cannot jump start the economy before that time, or the pandemic will just spike up again and we'll be back to square one or even worse. So that's my message. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll be posting these each week. If you like what you've heard, please follow me and give me some likes. Thank you for listening.